पढ़ेंगे जी. So friends, sorry for the what do you call it, disturbance actually. So we are discussing Ambedkar's ideas on the forms and purposes of democracy, which are varied in nature. So he was saying that apart from other forms of democracy, the 20th century, like in a sense, has made us familiar with this idea of people's democracy, where uh, the the interests of the people, they are above the considerations of any constitutional procedure. And the same would put as a mere legality. Actually, it is more than legality. So, coming to the purpose of democracy, Ambedkar says, I quote, the purpose of modern democracy is not so much to put a curb on the autocratic king, but to bring about the welfare of the people. So, here, unquote. So, here he says that the purpose of the democracy also changed. It is not just to, in fact, no, stop the king or widely put to a hereditary rule, but putting the welfare of the people in the front, in fact, no, has the distinct change in the purpose of, say, democracy. So, friends, by saying so, uh, Ambedkar, in fact, no, not just when he became the chairman of the drafting committee of the constitution, even before that, since 1930s, mid 1930s, actually, uh, he has been talking about how a democracy should be there in India and how its functioning should be. So he was, like in a sense, thinking about the formation of democracy in India, having a very clear understanding of as to what is the kind of a nature of Indian society and its compatibility to form a democracy, a sound democracy. So therefore, he, in 1952, and then later on in 1951, actually, he has given an interview to Voice of America on the title called as "The Prospects of Democracy in India." And in 1951, he has given an elaborate lecture, which is called as a Gokhale lecture at Pune District Law Association. And in two, three forms, in fact, no, he has talked about the prospects of democracy, and he was also talking about the prerequisites of democracy in India, and he was also talking about the impediments of parliamentary democracy, actually. So therefore, when we couch these three, say, talks, elaborations by Dr. Ambedkar, what we understand is he has been putting 7 conditions, important conditions for a successful democracy in India. We will just have a look into these things, and among these 7 prerequisites or conditions, Dr. Ambedkar was talking about constitutional morality as one of the important uh, conditions or prerequisites for a successful democracy in India. So let us have a look into these things. The first condition that Dr. Ambedkar has considered for a successful democracy is that there must be no glaring inequalities in the society. So this is a condition, Dr. Ambedkar says, for the success of democracy. There must not be an oppressed class. There must not be a suppressed class. There must be a class, in fact, no, where everything is common. There must not be a class which has got all the privileges and a class which has got all the burdens to carry. With such a thing, such a division, such an organization of a society, perhaps Ambedkar says it would be impossible for the democracy to thrive. He was quoting Abraham Lincoln, who said, "A house divided against itself cannot stand." So therefore, Ambedkar wanted not just a house united, but a society united to be able to have to be able to, in fact, no, or to be eligible to say run a democracy and make it a success in a country like India. And the second condition Dr. Ambedkar talks about is the existence of opposition. This is a kind of a functional kind of a question that he makes. I quote, "It seems to me that democracy means a veto of power against a hereditary authority or autocratic authority. Democracy means that nobody has any perpetual authority to rule, but rule is subjected to sanction by the people and can be changed in the how challenged in the house by itself actually." So this is where he is saying, and the challenge or even the correction, in fact, no, if at all to be brought in, it will be brought in the parliament by the opposition actually. So therefore, there is a very, very important role of opposition in democracy. And Ambedkar says, without a sound democracy, opposition, very formidable opposition, there cannot be a sound democracy in a country like India. So, friends, in this connection, Dr. Ambedkar also wants the role of media to act as a kind of a check and balance against the government. But he says in 1952 itself, unfortunately, in our country, all our newspapers, of course, there have been no TV channels at the time, all our newspapers, for one reason or the other, I believe, earning for the revenue from the advertisements. And they have given far more publicity to the government than to the opposition, because you can't get any revenue from the opposition. So he was talking about all these in a kind of what we call as the pillars of democracy to be say in place to see that there is a success of democracy, especially in a country like India. And the third condition Ambedkar talks about is equality in law and administration. There must be equality in law and administration, not just in fact now as a matter of rule, but Ambedkar says what is more important is the equality of treatment in administration, because a simply a kind of a doctrine or a kind of a law laid out is no say kind of a it's not enough to feel that it is in operation. So Ambedkar says that there should be equality in law and administration, and more particularly equality in treatment. There shall not be any discrimination in the administration or in the bureaucracy. In this context, Andre Bite, of course, just like M.N. Srinivas, he's also a sociologist, anthropologist in India. So Andre Bite mentions certain operational conditions which are deemed to be part and parcel of these process of equality in law and administration. The processes include: one, access and openness of public institutions to the citizenry without discrimination or intimidation. The second is transparency in the working of public institutions. Third, integrity of the processes. And the fourth is accountability mechanisms capable of affecting outcomes and efficiency redressing the wrongs. So therefore, he was saying that public institutions are administered by bureaucrats, and which, if they are averse to follow these conditions, it can be an impediment to democracy and will be a means by which public correction can subvert a democracy. I would like to bring to your notice that Professor Andre Bite, he has delivered Ambedkar lectures in University of Bombay, uh, probably 3 decades ago. So he was bringing to these issues, in fact, now in one of his lectures. And the fourth condition that Ambedkar keeps for the successful democracy in this country is observation of or observance of constitutional morality, which of course we will deal with this elaborately in the say next part of the talk. Now we'll move to the fifth condition. The condition number 5 is no tyranny of majority over the minority. This is a very, very important condition Dr. Ambedkar keeps, and which he says that it is crucial for India or in Indian society or in the Indian polity that there shall not be any tyranny of the majority over the minority. So he says that in two contexts. One context is within the parliament. He says that the opposition must be heard. It is therefore necessary that when democracy is working, the majority on which it is based must not act in a tyrannical manner. They shall not in fact now shout out the opposition, which obviously would be in a minority. So this in fact now, like in a sense, if you compare it with the present what do you call functioning of say the houses, both houses in the parliament or even the assemblies, probably you will know this is exactly what's happening. The opposition is made, in fact now is snubbed, is cowed down, is shouted out. So that is what Dr. Ambedkar says. It is the tyranny of the majority over minority. And at the same time, in the societal context, he says that in a pluralistic society, opinion of all citizens, irrespective of a majority or a minority, be considered. And Ambedkar stresses saying that the minorities must be won over and they shall not be subdued or snubbed, actually. So these are all, like in a sense, important conditions, Dr. Ambedkar says, uh, for the success of democracy in India. Otherwise, like in a sense, democracy would be a mere, like in a sense, what he call, in very, very, say, critical words, he said, democracy, in fact, now without all these conditions, is like that we are building a mansion on a dung heap. So let's look into the sixth kind of a prerequisite that Dr. Ambedkar is talking about. That is functioning of a moral order in the society. See, not many political scientists of across the world have not stressed upon this particular aspect of morality or ethical behavior uh, in running of a parliamentary democracy. Ambedkar says, with the exception of Harold Lasky, our political scientists have never considered this aspect of democracy. Ethics is something separate from politics. The moral order is always taken for granted in democracy, but Ambedkar says it has to be very, very carefully and consideredly observed, actually. Democracy is spoken as a free government. Free government means that in a vast aspects of social life, people are left free to carry on without interference of law. Or if law has to be made, the lawmaker expects that the society will have enough morality in it to make the law success. And that is the reason why a moral order, like in a sense, that the allegiance to a kind of a law is more important. So therefore, if there is no moral order, democracy will go into pieces as it is going probably in our own country today. See, it's not just making a law. The lawmakers, as well as in fact no the citizens, should keep that kind of a moral lesson or kind of a say a responsibility to see that the law is brought into action with full conviction. So we will look into that part. And then the final prerequisite Dr. Ambedkar talks about is democracy requires public conscience. This public conscience is very, very important, and especially in a country like India. Public conscience means conscience which becomes agitated at every wrong, no matter who is the sufferer, whether he belongs to your caste, your creed, or your region or religion and all, no matter who is the sufferer. And it means that everybody, whether he suffers that particular wrong or not, is prepared to join him in order to get him relieved. So this is a kind of a like in a sense uh, an informed citizenry going beyond all these kind of contradictions, act as a citizen, looks for a common goal and common good, and becomes agitated at every wrong. They shall not, in fact, no, turn away their eyes and ears, or they shall not be complicit when a daylight wrongs are being perpetuated. Here, Dr. Ambedkar stressing on this, he says a quote. He says that recently, I have been reading that a large number of young boys and girls belonging to the white race are also joining the struggle of Indians in South Africa. He was talking about in the South Africa, where the natives, in fact, now were talking about their rights as against the minority colonizer, as British. There is a South Africa everywhere in the villages, and yet I have very seldom found anybody not belonging to a scheduled caste taking up the cause of scheduled caste and fighting. And why? So this is what he wonders, and he says that the existence of an active civil society is an essential element of democracy. So, having said that, these are the 7 important prerequisites of a successful democracy, and Ambedkar, in fact, now elaborates on many other things, but he puts a lot of stress on one condition, which is calls it as the observation of the constitutional morality. So, friends, in this talk, as we have laid out, let us see what is a constitutional morality, what is its meaning and its operation, and why it is so important that Dr. Ambedkar, in fact, picked it up as a very, very vital kind of a prerequisite among all. Of course, all the 7 prerequisites are important, but precisely constitutional morality is one particular, say, kind of a concept which you will find only Dr. Ambedkar talking about. No other political scientist, politician across, in fact, the world have ever talked about that particular thing as important criterion. So let us look into the details of constitutional morality. Constitutional morality basically means the adherence to the core principles of the constitution in a democracy. Therefore, constitutional morality requires that allegiance to the constitution is non-transactional. First, everyone must, in fact, keep their important attachment to the constitution. And the constitutional morality is not just limited to following the constitutional provisions in their literal sense, but includes a commitment to an inclusive and democratic political process in which both individual and the collective interests of the society are satisfied. So this becomes very, very important. Allegiance to the constitution as a polity, as a kind of a framework for administration is fine, but much more than to that, the allegiance of the citizenry or even the government towards a commitment for an inclusive democratic process, actually, that becomes more important. So if you look into the origin of this term, in fact, now we find say in the doctrine, in fact, no, our explanation of George Grote in his book called as History of Greece. At Columbia University, we know, friends, 1913 to 1916, Dr. Ambedkar took courses in Greek history, and he definitely would have, in fact, now got in touch with the history of Greece, which was written by George Grote, and he first used this term constitutional morality in the debates over the draft constitution, although he defined differently from Grote. Ambedkar's constitutional morality was not about the tolerance of social difference. George Grote talks about this tolerance of social difference. He was talking about, in fact, no, a kind of a tolerance among the diverse people in a polity. But Ambedkar stresses upon not just the tolerance, but instead about the legal restraints of a communal majority. This is where he puts that particular term, constitutional morality, being much more relevant to India in this particular area. The communal majority, in fact, now should be restrained by the state not to in fact no in indulge in the excesses or tyranny over the minorities. So that is where in fact he finds this particular communal measure of morality very very important. In the Constituent Assembly, Ambedkar justified including the mundane details of administration within the constitution by arguing that India's people lacked a culture of constitutional morality, and democracy was only a top dressing in India on an otherwise undemocratic Indian soil. So this is where he says democracy is not a natural sentiment in India. People have to consciously say develop that sentiment, and he says that it's only a top dressing actually, and unless the citizens develop this constitutional morality, he was saying that this democracy would never not ever be successful. So let us see how Ambedkar was talking about this in the Constituent Assembly. What was his intention actually? We know, friends, Constituent Assembly met in an atmosphere of great expectation. The country had attained freedom after a long period of colonial rule, and the possibilities of constructing a new social order based on liberty, equality, and social harmony seems inexhaustible, because that kind of a urge was not seen in many of these people. And the Constituent Assembly brought together a galaxy of outstanding persons. Yet among all, Ambedkar stood out as the most clear sighted in his understanding of the contradictions facing Indian society at that time. He saw the pervasive contradictions between the hierarchical social structure inherited from the past and the urge for a democratic legal political order forcefully expressed in the assembly. Everybody is talking about it like that there be liberty, equality, fraternity. Everybody was agreeing that they shall be a kind of a democratic polity. But Ambedkar goes a little beyond. He says, we see that no doubt the members of the Constituent Assembly were aware of inequality, caste, creed, gender inequality in this country. There are conflicts and there is disorder prevalent in Indian society during their time. But most of them had been acquired a convenient alibi, and the habit of attributing every misfortune in India to the misdeeds of the colonial rule. This is not then. That habit continues, friends, among the large sections of the Indian intelligentsia even today. This is what we call, it's not colonialism, it is the internal colonization which has been continuing in this country, which is the villain of this kind of an attitude. Ambedkar was very, very agile to this particular kind of attitude of this majority. He says that, I quote, by independence, we have lost the excuse of blaming the British for everything going wrong. If hereafter things go wrong, we will have nobody to blame except ourselves, unquote. So he was very, very vigilant of that particular thing. Ambedkar's observations on constitutional morality made at a critical juncture in our social and political life are of utmost significance, not only for the socially and educationally backward classes who are majority in this country, but for all Indians, irrespective of all citizens, we should rather say that. So why? Because Indian society was not a society of equal citizens at that time. It was not a society of equal citizens, but a society based on castes and communities. To transform such a society of castes and communities into one of citizens would not be an easy task. The Constitution, friends, at best provide a legal framework, a necessary but not sufficient condition for such a social transformation. To be effective, the constitutional laws have to rest on the substratum of constitutional morality. This is where Ambedkar was stressing upon that. And he asked the question, could the presence of such a morality be taken for granted in our country? He was deeply concerned of the question. He was saying, constitutional morality is not a natural sentiment. It has to be cultivated. We must realize that our people are yet to learn it, actually. So this is where he was stressing about that for a successful democracy. And he made a very important distinction between the societal morality and the constitutional morality, where the societal morality, it refers to the traditional, old, spontaneous, and commonsensical morality which has been there in the society, and which the dominant communities in fact know, they try to stress upon. This is the what do you call, say, democracy. I mean, this is the kind of a morality that the society would follow, and they would not in fact allow any kind of a divergence from there. If the society is unequal, the societal morality says that let it be in the status quo. But however, constitutional morality, on the other hand, is a modern, consciously developed, progressive, and based on the principles enshrined in the constitution, such as egalitarianism, social justice, secularism, and so on. So therefore, the distinction between societal morality in a country like India and the constitutional morality is the distinction between the regressive attitude and the progressive attitude for a modern national society. So now we look into the functionality of a constitutional morality. Without some infusion of constitutional morality among legislators, judges, lawyers, ministers, civil servants, writers, public intellectuals, and not the least among the citizens, actually, the constitution becomes only a plaything among the power brokers, actually. Ambedkar was well aware of that the successful operation of democracy would require not only the creation of a new political order, but also creating a corresponding social order. Would the prevalent social order in India be able to rise to the challenges presented by the new constitution? He had misgivings about it. He has doubts about it, actually. And the developments of in the government and politics since his time have shown that his misgivings and doubts were not without foundation. He had hoped that our people would learn the lessons of constitutional morality in the course of time. How much they have learned, in fact? Ramchandra Guha, another public intellectual with an anthropological background, in 2007 writes about a prominent member of the Union Cabinet who said, I quote, I know that most members of the parliament see the constitution for the first time when they take an oath on it, actually, unquote. So they, they don't bother about what is a constitution. They don't care to look into it. The politicians and many of the administrators, in fact, now, or general citizenry in India do not look into the constitution, actually. But however, Ambedkar wanted, in fact, no constitution to be the source of inspiration for a prudent and a successful democracy. That is what he was saying, that if the citizens' allegiance is to the constitution, not to the customs and traditions which are against it. That's where he said the laws are on the side of inequality, but the laws which are there in the constitution are on the side of equality, but the customs and the traditions people follow are on the side of inequality. This incompatibility actually has to be dealt with by the citizens. Dr. Pedarataya, there is another another indication that this will end in 10 minutes. Hope you will deal with this. Yeah. Now, friends, let's look into another as an observation by Pratap Bhan Mehta, who was a political scientist. And he says that in Ambedkar's view, the function of the parliament is not so much to represent popular sovereignty as it is to debate and constantly question the government. But the function of the parliament, in Ambedkar's expectation, is to prevent the government from claiming monopoly over the popular will. So this is a very kind of a distinct kind of a point of departure for Ambedkar. Generally, people would expect that the role of the parliament or the role of the members of the opposition is to see that they, as representatives of the people, they have to, in fact, express the opinions of the public. They must act as representatives of the public. But besides this duty, Ambedkar expects the parliamentarians to restrict the government, to prevent the government, which is there in the power at that particular time, from claiming monopoly over the public will or the popular will. So this is in fact now making it important checks and balance actually. Then only there would be a sound democracy. Now, friends, let us return to the law and constitutional morality, because it is the bureaucracy which has to look after in fact now what is there in the constitution by implementing it. The vagaries of bureaucracy which have been in fact now observed by Ambedkar as well as Andre Bhite, we have seen. The second is it is the parliament, the legislature, that has to observe what is there in the constitution. And the third organ basically is the jurisprudence, actually is the judiciary. So let's have a look at to the judiciary, towards the judiciary, as to how the judiciary also looks at constitutional morality. Anthropologist Leo Coleman in 2019, writing about the recent majoritarian rule, mentions that in the past decade, the term constitutional morality has enjoyed a revival in the Indian jurisprudence, because it is being used to describe the respect for difference that is claimed to be both the ancient inheritance and of a pluralistic society, and inherent to the modern identity of Indian constitutionalism. Today, there is a public talk, everybody, like in a sense of every shade, they say that tolerance or respect towards pluralism has been in fact no an age old Sanatan India's in fact no cultural heritage, and at the same time they say that it is the constitutional kind of a expectation. These besides in fact now, or behind these proclamations, what we see in India is a kind of a what you call a religious jingoism, a kind of a majoritarian attitude actually, which brings to us to talk about a thing called as constitutional morality. That is what Leo Coleman in fact now is talking about. The present Supreme Court has a judge, Justice D.Y. Chandrachud. He was, while giving an address recently, he mentions that two contemporary uses of constitutional morality are being observed in the Indian constitutional law. First, constitutional morality is seen as a counterpose to the popular morality. He was saying popular morality against the constitutional morality. Popular morality basically is about the expressions of the people with regard to, in fact, no certain judgments, even among the judges, concerning ruling with regard to adultery, rape, with regard to, like in a sense, say rights of the LGBTQ, and also some sort of things about Sabrimala temple and all, where Justice Chandrachud says that the judges are also sometimes try to tend towards the popular majority. But he says that constitutional morality, as a reincarnated basic structure of the doctrine, involving the analysis of the conscience of the Constitution, what we talk about the soul of the Constitution, the conscience of the Constitution, or the basic structure of the Constitution, is based on that constitutional morality which Dr. Ambedkar said. So, friends, now as long-standing constitutional conventions are being regularly attacked, even rescinded by the majoritarian party in contemporary India, Ambedkar's specific concern about the legal relations between majorities and minorities, his wider pragmatism about legal forms and constitutional safeguards, and his later doubts about the egalitarian achievements of Indian constitution, they deserve new attention. For Ambedkar, my dear friends, we all pretty well know, we have discussed these aspects in our previous talks. Without fraternity, equality and liberty would be no deeper than the coats of a paint. He says that a constitutional morality requires both, in fact, the features of abstraction and agreement for cooperation. These are the two important aspects, in fact, that Indian citizens should have. It requires that the presumption that every Indian citizen is equal. That is a kind of an abstraction, or a kind of a what do you call, position that every Indian should take. That every presumption that we are real equal. However, that equality is possible only when, for constitutional purposes, our caste identities do not matter. We should rise above those kind of identities and then divisions. A constitutional morality requires the sense that despite all differences, we are part of a common deliberate enterprise. That is why Dr. Ambedkar says, I'm an Indian first and I'm an Indian last. That must be the kind of an attitude that the citizens of India should adopt. So, having said that, my dear friends, uh, I'm coming to the last part of this particular talk. Let us have a kind of an assessment as to the situation of democracy in India today. Why? Because 75 years ago, there was an anxiety about the survival of democracy. But today, friends, its continued existence has come to be taken for granted because democracy is there, elections are being conducted. So, therefore, we don't feel that kind of anxiety today. Many feel that elections are taking place, democracy is in place, so no, it's in sound. Today, the question is no longer whether democracy will survive in India, but what kind of a democracy will be there in India. That is the anxiety. Andre Bite, I will again bring him because Andre Bite has written successive research articles on this constitutional morality. 1999, 2008, and 2008. He wrote, say, in Economic and Political Weekly about essays on this particular aspect. He introduces a distinction between constitutional democracy and populist democracy. And he argues that democracy has survived in India for the last 75 years, not by adhering strictly to the ideal of the constitutional democracy, but by moving away from it towards a more populist form of democracy. So, while making this distinction between a populist democracy and a constitutional democracy, he says that India survived this democracy more as a